Good morning, everybody. Today we're here to talk about a proposal on the juvenile justice. We've heard a lot over the last 6 months or even a year and a half over car theft and how there is recidivism in the state of Connecticut. One thing that's not talked about very often, though, is what happens after the crime and the victims that have been impacted, both physically, economically, and emotionally. And so today we are bringing two people forward, or three people forward to tell their story. We have John and Kathy Rasmus and Sandy Krause, who will tell their stories about how not only were they a victim of crimes involving juveniles and car theft, but to tell their story about how their injuries, their economic impacts, their physical injuries have lasted much longer than even the sentences that these juveniles who have committed these crimes have endured. And so with no further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to John and Kathy.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you, Representative Candelora, for inviting us here today. I am joined by my wife, Kathy. I call her my wounded warrior. Took us a long time to talk about this accident. It's very painful, but it all comes down to we want to tell our story because we believe change needs to be made, and it needs to be changed in this building. October 25th, 2019, we were taking our last motorcycle ride of the year, and we were going 10 miles an hour down a straight road, clear day, and out of the corner of our eye, we saw a car gun it out of a gas station, hit our bike, took us down, and without hesitation, took off. We were left as roadkill on the side of the road. I was unconscious. I scraped my face, stitches, concussion. I got the least of it. My poor wife, Kathy, lost her leg. This young boy, I'm not going to call him a man, drove another quarter of a mile, went around a bend, hit a pickup truck, totaled that pickup truck, tried to back out from that, and a good Samaritan that saw our accident actually boxed him in, and he was apprehended. Believe it or not, he was not field tested, and that's a critical issue. Connecticut General Statute 414-224 is the hit and run law. When there is a serious accident, and this was serious injuries, there were serious injuries, okay, it's a felony count, and it calls for a prison term of 2 to 20 years. Kathy and I, believe me, we're compassionate people. We didn't think this was a 20-year case. I will say, however, that with the juvenile justice reforms back in 2010, during the Malloy administration, changes were made, and if you look at section 46-127G, on the motion of a defendant, a case can be moved to juvenile court. Juvenile court, we know, is a joke. What happened with this case is it went youthful offender. And this young boy decided to take that charge, that plea, okay, was given a fixed sentence. He decided to re-argue the sentence, which brought us back in, brought us the pain again. My wife and I, family, had to go to the sentencing hearing. At the end of the day, the judge sided with our feelings. This was a 16-month case. He was facing 0 to 16 months. We had another recent little dagger that was driven through our heart. 2 weeks ago, this I should back up, this happened in July of 2021. 2 weeks ago, we got a letter by email stating that this defendant inmate would be released on January 24th, not having served 6 months of his sentence. We were supposed to be informed of any action on this case, a Savin, I believe it's called, report. We received no such communication. We would have been allowed to update our impact statement to go into that review, that decision. Have to say I got on the horn and did get a hold of parole and corrections. It took me some time, but they did research their records, and guess what? We were never notified of that hearing, and they've acknowledged that. There was a 10-day stay that was put on that, and we were allowed to update our impact statement, and we did so. I have to tell you, I was kind of skeptical that they would go back on their decision. And unfortunately, my feelings were confirmed. On Monday, this past Monday, January 31st, this young boy, again, I'm not going to call him a man, he was released. Changes need to be made to the system, and they need to be made now.
Hi, my name is Sandy Krause, and that certainly was a very moving story. I had never heard it before, and after hearing that story, I consider myself fortunate about what happened to me. However inconvenient and expensive what has happened to me has been. I've had 2 cars stolen out of my driveway. The first was in March 2020. The car was used in multiple robberies and ultimately was involved in an accident with a Waterbury police car. It was distressing, to say the least. The second, I got a new car. That car I had for 10 weeks. And on September 4th of last year, my brand new car was stolen out of my driveway. It was locked. My house was locked. They broke into the house, stole my pocketbook, used my credit cards, used my car in multiple thefts. People were calling in my license plate to the police department when they were trying to rob their homes. That car was also involved in an accident. I believe it was a hit-and-run accident. So much damage was done to my car. 5 airbags were deployed. We all know about the juvenile laws. So what I want to let you know is what's always said to me is it's just property. Your insurance company will make you whole again. Well, I want to explain to you all that that is not the case in the state of Connecticut. I got $1,000 towards a rental car, which was exhausted in 15 days. It's been 5 months since I've had the privilege of driving a car because the airbags are on back order and haven't left Europe yet. My car was destroyed inside. They must have had a fire to cook some drugs because the carpets were burned, the seats were stained. With the airbags deploying, there was soot all over the inside of the car. The insurance company has so many rules that protect them, and there's nothing that protects the victims. They have no responsibility to get me my car back in a certain amount of time. It's just my tough luck. I'll be lucky if I have my car next September, according to the body shop. The other thing that they were allowed to do was to cancel my comprehensive coverage, but not reduce my premiums. So if I get my car back and it's stolen again, the insurance company is not liable for my car any longer, or any car that's registered to anyone in my household. So it's not just property. We have an alarm system. We lock our doors. We have deadbolts. We have Ring cameras. We have 8 floodlights around our house. And the police say that they will be back. And we've seen them on our Ring cameras subsequent to these 2 robberies, as have people in our neighborhood. Am I frightened? Yes. Was I frightened after the first theft? No, because they didn't enter our home. They entered our home while we were asleep. I understand from the police that they did have weapons. They were juveniles. Nothing will happen to them. And I'm left to clean up this mess that in no way was my doing. People ask, am I angry? I'm not angry. I'm really not angry. I understand that often these juveniles are exploited by older people. What I am is disappointed. I'm disappointed that I and other residents of the state of Connecticut have to live like this, with our doors bolted, our windows locked, our cars locked, and we still have to worry about them being stolen. Thank you so much for giving me the chance to tell my story. It is very cathartic, and I do consider myself lucky that I suffered no physical injury. But it is still something that we need to all be conscious of and work to change. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandy. Next, we're going to have John with Safe Streets.
Hi, my name is John Poriello, and I'm with Safe Streets Connecticut. There have been a lot of crime victims that have questioned, how did this crime epidemic happen in Connecticut? The crime epidemic was caused by many years of legislation that has removed accountability and consequences for juvenile criminal activity. The intentions of these laws was to protect the future of juveniles. I am in favor of protecting the futures of juveniles. However, it's the feel-good legislation that was created that is causing the problem. The feel-good legislation was created by enablers of crime. The definition of an enabler is one who enables another to persist in self-destructive behavior by providing excuses or making it possible to avoid the consequences of such behavior. The enablers in the legislature have created a protected class of citizen criminals that can commit crimes without consequences. The criminals are smart, and they know the system is not going to punish them. The communication that the legislation is sending to juveniles is, crime is fine. Crime is a game where you cannot lose. The enablers of crime have cited fraudulent statistics that crime is down. Thankfully, Governor Lamont acknowledged the problem in October on the steps of the Capitol with the mother and grandmother of a teenager who was shot and killed in Waterbury. Governor Lamont said the following: if the courts had been a little stricter, tougher probation requirements, and keeping an ankle monitor bracelet on him, that probably would have given this kid a better chance to be alive today. We have got a lot to do. And it also made the front page of the Hartford Courant the next day. He went on to say, some of these kids we've got to be a lot stricter with. 10% of these folks are creating 90% of the problem. Look what happened in this shooting case. Lamont said one of the things that mom said was, I wish there were more outlets. I wish there was more to do. I wish the system had been a little stricter. I wish probation had been a little stronger after the first offenses. I wish the ankle bracelet had GPS so that it didn't just track when someone left the house, but could track where they went. Upon hearing these words come out of the governor's mouth, I thought he would call a special session to address juvenile crime. That did not happen. With the legislative session upon us, we have an opportunity to turn crime enablers into champions of public safety. The definition of a champion is someone who fights or publicly speaks in support of a belief or cause. Some of the champions of public safety are present here today, and they're behind me. They have voted in a way that attempts to hold criminals accountable. In order for Connecticut to be a safe place to live and work again, we need more champions of public safety. And with that, I turn that over to Craig Fishbein, a champion of public safety.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming here today. You know, public safety should not be a partisan issue. It's not red or blue. It's red, white, and blue. It's black, it's brown, it's yellow, it's purple. It's all the colors that you could possibly think of. Connecticut residents deserve to feel safe within their state and their communities. And during this next session, we're pushing for certain aspects of legislation to try and make our residents more safe. I'm just going to touch on the portions having to do with the judicial branch and our juvenile justice process and our system. You know, and I have to give kudos to the judicial branch. You know, we've been talking about these issues since the end of session last year and all through last session. And the judicial branch has really stepped to the table and listened to us and has made some changes. Something that the press hasn't picked up on is a few weeks ago, they issued a report that recommends reopening CJTS to use it as a detention center. Something that nobody knows about, nobody's covered. I spoke with them yesterday, and I give them kudos for doing that. That's a step forward, something that we've been looking for since the end of last session and before. But they expanded the ability of officers to get access to records of a juvenile when they originally gets arrested. That is a step forward. Part of the problem is that right now that system has only been used 15 times since it was put in place at the end of August. Part of the problem is the officer in the field does not have access to the system. They have to apply to get access to the system and then make their request for a detention order. Tied to that, so we would have an officer have that availability out in the field. But tied to that, we have this 6-hour hold provision that was put into place in 2018. Presently, an officer can't hold or detain a youth in excess of 6 hours without an order of the court. Well, that means if an officer stops a car in the middle of the night with 4 juveniles in it, stolen car identified, they've got to close their case basically within 6 hours. We would have that 6-hour time limit flex if an officer in good faith is going to try to get one of those detention orders. Another thing is when judges are looking at these detention orders, originally in 2012, I believe it was, there was a whole menu, a host of things that a judge could look at in determining that detention order. But in 2017, the legislature put in effect Public Act 16-14, and that made it irrelevant whether or not there was a strong probability the child would run away based upon their past conduct. It also made it irrelevant whether or not the child had violated the conditions of release. It didn't matter anymore on a detention order. We would have the two essentially put together and have a judge be able to determine that returning a child to the family, to the parents, is reasonably likely to be ineffective in stopping this juvenile from potentially committing other crimes. We would also require a judge to order a DCF investigation of a juvenile if they're charged with a felony, Class A misdemeanor, a charge resulting from the loss or life or a serious physical injury, as you've heard about here today, a sexual assault, or an offense involving the use of the firearm. We'd also institute mandatory GPS monitoring. If a juvenile has been arrested for a crime, they've been released, they get arrested for another crime, GPS monitoring. We would create a new offense of larceny of a motor vehicle. Presently, the structure of our system is based upon the value of the vehicle. So a Mercedes and a Volkswagen are stolen at the same time. Those two cases are treated differently. They're both motor vehicles. They should be treated the same because the collateral consequences of loss of the vehicle, as you heard about today, can be extremely significant, and they should be treated the same. And once creating that new law, we would have the first offense would be a Class A misdemeanor, while a second or subsequent offense would be a Class B felony. The reason why Class B felony, it opens it up to a discretionary transfer from juvenile court to adult court. You still need a gatekeeper function of the judge, but it just allows that on the second and third offense. And last but not least, we had clean slate that we passed this past year. And I was a little disappointed in that, we ran an amendment that, we ran many amendments that tried to take things out of clean slate. Presently, somebody can go before the Board of Pardons and Paroles to get their record erased. We pointed out that there were violent crimes that were being automatically erased as a result of clean slate, and we ran some amendments having to do with that. Nobody covered that. Those amendments failed, but we would have by statute roll back clean slate with regard to violent offenses, make those individuals go to the Board of Pardons and Paroles, explain what they're doing in their community, what they've done, how they've changed to get those arrests erased. Otherwise, it does not help public safety. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Representative Howard, who will give you our perspective from a police aspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Here. Good morning, everyone. I think it's an important thing to talk about. We talk about juvenile justice, public safety, that out on the front line in this state, we have tremendous caliber of men and women who put a uniform on every day and do a difficult job. Right now, just a few miles from here, a tremendous gentleman is being laid to rest out doing his job. And we remember him here today. But I want to talk about how policing has been affected in this state and the result of public safety that we've seen as a decline. It's important to know that we need a police department in this state that is accountable, that is transparent, but also is empowered to do the difficult job that we task these men and women to do every day. And right now in Connecticut, that is way out of balance. And when I say that, we have a few reforms to the police accountability law that passed in 2020 that I'd like to present here today that we continue to work on along with my colleagues. And I will say that my colleagues and I have worked tirelessly over the past 18 months to understand the concerns of the other side around police accountability and transparency, and work to craft language that strikes that balance for an accountable and transparent police force that is empowered to keep us all safe. Some of those proposals include the ability, the restoration, and before I say that, let me remind everybody that in 2019, the legislature passed Public Act 19-90, which talked about police accountability and transparency and made some legislative changes, and law enforcement did not act negatively about that. Policing did not shut down. Fatalities on our highways did not rapidly increase because, again, law enforcement welcomes transparency and accountability when it's properly balanced with their ability to do their job. One of those things is the restoration of the ability for a police officer to seek consent on a motor vehicle stop. You heard stories already about how crime takes place around motor vehicles and on our highways. That is an essential function of law enforcement to be proactive and in some cases even reactive. We were careful to create legislation that puts safeguards in place to ensure that no police officer in the state of Connecticut will be soliciting consent for no reason, and certainly not based upon the race of the driver or occupants of the vehicle. The second thing that we're asking for is for the legislature to amend 6004 to put in safeguards for our public health professionals who have to see and endure so much when they seek help for mental health or submit to a behavioral assessment that they're now required to do, that if that behavioral assessment or that seeking of help determines that this job has done a damage to their mental health, that they will not be unfairly disciplined, discharged, or demoted. We're also asking for some clarity when it comes to decertification, to allow officers who have been fired from a job or being held captive at a job while an investigation is pending, that they can seek an appeal through post to determine if their actions really were something where they should no longer be entrusted with public office. We're also asking for the legislature to adopt law where police agencies in this state can achieve the post-Tier 3 level of certification, a high standard in this nation for police agencies, but much less expensive than the current CALEA requirement that is causing an impact on municipal budgets, which either means that police budgets need to increase, or worse yet, they need to be taken away from something else, and again, making our streets less safe. We're also asking on budgetary matters for police agencies and municipalities to be reinstated to be able to allow them to take surplus from the military when that equipment is necessary for police officers to do their job. We're also asking the legislature to again go back and really take a good look at the use of force language that is in there and make it something that is understandable for police officers so they know what the expectations are. Plenty of states that are generally looked at as blue states have operated this way and put laws in place that really hit the mark to keep their police officers accountable and transparent while also empowering them to keep us all safe. And the last thing is the qualified immunity. I talk to police officers every single day. As many of you know, I spent the last 20 years in law enforcement. I work in law enforcement today, and I talk to police officers from suburbia to the urban areas to the brave men and women who patrol our highways with the state police. And I understand that that qualified immunity portion of that bill is really concerning to them, and they continue to tell me, I don't want to be the test case. And now we see a lack of enforcement on our highways. We see death rates on our highways like we've never seen before, and it's time that this legislature take action. We've worked to meet a compromise. We have reasonable solutions, and we hope that our colleagues will join us in keeping the people of Connecticut safe. Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to somebody who worked, Representative Callahan, who spent his career working in probation and can talk about how that works after that process. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for coming and your interest in the topic. Thanks, Representative Howard. Happy he's our ranking member on public safety. He does a great job representing victims, as does our ranking member on judiciary, Craig Fishbein. Thank you for the victims who came in here today to tell us our stories. I'm going to tell mine, too. I was a victim of crime. I had 2 cars stolen and my house broken into. I also had a unique experience of I was a probation officer, a line officer for 10 years for adult probation and a chief for almost 20. So I got to see all different sides of this, unique perspective from the victim standpoint, from the offender standpoint, and from the court standpoint. So I'm here to address some issues we can maybe help with on the victim side. I think funding, and our caucus wants to propose funding for Office of the Victim's Advocate. As you know, many of these juveniles don't have jobs. When it comes to restitution for the victims, they don't have a way to get the money. And sometimes their young parents don't have the money either. And a lot of times these victims are left holding the bag with large expenses from the crimes that were committed against them. Let's get some money allocated to the Office of the Victim's Advocate so we can tap into that to help these victims. Also, when a crime of violence is committed against a victim, let's have those cases heard in the GA where that victim lives, in that geographical area. Sorry, I can't see anything. Also, in talking to juvenile probation officers over the past couple days, I still have a lot of friends that work for Judicial. One of the things that they say is missing, these kids don't understand the impact that the crimes are having on their own communities. So they want victim impact panels, and we also would like to see victim impact panels address not just DUIs, although they do a great job with MAD, but addressing the violent crimes that are perpetrated against people in their own communities. Because these kids sometimes, in my experience also, in sitting down with them, they think, well, insurance takes care of it, everybody's happy. I know in my case and some of the other victims' cases that you just heard from, it's not the case. We had to get our locks changed. We had to get bank accounts changed. I had my kids not feeling safe. So there's a deep impact to this, and I really appreciate everyone coming forward. Also, I have to tell you, when I got one of my cars back, it stunk like marijuana. It didn't work right, and unfortunately, in the marijuana bill, they carved out a part of the bill where you can't stop people just for the suspicion of smoking marijuana in the car, even though it's against the law and it's a Class D felony. Representative Howard actually introduced an amendment to change this, and it was swiftly voted down by the Democrats. So I really appreciate everybody being here, and I think together, with all the good people behind us and the victims that are speaking and coming forward, that we can make some changes and help the crime situation in Connecticut. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Bipartisan discussions broke down over the summer.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope so. I think there are certainly individuals on the other side of the aisle that share our concerns. And I think as we continue to point out, the proposals that we have are reasonable solutions. I don't think we're offering ideas that really don't make sense or that are not well thought through. So I'm hopeful that we could begin these conversations this session and address it, because Connecticut is not better off. We are not safer. We're seeing fatalities on the highway. Victims and criminals are much worse off in the long run in the state of Connecticut. So we need to fix both sides of the equation.
What has the conversation been like leading up to this with your counterparts in this? Do you feel like there's a way that you could come to the table?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion right now, as we saw with the governor when he came forward, they sort of want to acknowledge it to the public because the public is frustrated and they're not buying this narrative that Connecticut is still safe and we're following the national average. So on the one hand, they're trying to acknowledge the crime that's out there, but they really just don't want to address it, because I think that there is, frankly, some catering to some extreme groups that want to continue this narrative of having no consequences to criminal activity. And so I think that narrative isn't working for them, and I think there is going to be a day reckoning. And so I think this session, we are not going to let up on this issue. We think it's important to all of our residents, no matter where you live, whether it's in a city or a suburb, and hopefully we'll be able to make some change before the election cycle.
Do you feel like it's a little too late? That this is coming later than you should have, that there should have been a special session months ago?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We talked about this in July, and we had our first press conference, and we talked about the potential loss of life if this continues. And we're hearing stories about people's lives that have been changed forever. And we need to change that trajectory in the state of Connecticut. And so we're very frustrated. We think it should have been done this summer. Democrats were very quick to call a special session and get us in on police accountability and pass a bill with very quickly last summer, and we're still feeling the impacts of it. I think they need to put that same emphasis on protecting the residents of the state of Connecticut, and I hope this is an issue that will be be at the forefront on our agenda.
Is there any inkling of fear? I mean, I know that there is a lot of optimism and momentum in this movement right now, but is there any fear that this maybe not get a solution this term, and what happens then?
Well, I think if there is no solution, I think you are going to see this be a big election issue. I think talking to our constituents, they're very upset, they're angry, they're scared. It's impacted them economically and physically, as we've heard these stories. And I think that the Democrats continuing to ignore this, they do it at their peril.
Can I ask an off-topic question? So the governor said the other day that he's possibly thinking of lifting the mask mandate for school children. What is your feeling about that?
Well, I think this fall we brought up this discussion. I think our caucus has always been concerned not about the virus and the impacts on children so much as what is the impact on children being masked for this long, for 2 years, especially our younger children. When we look at Europe and England and Israel, who have done studies, and they're not masking children under the age of 12 generally. And what we're now hearing from our teachers, our elementary school teachers, is that third graders are reading at a first grade level. There are issues with phonics and language development and socialization. And it's about time that kids could go to school and see somebody smile. It is probably the most restrictive institutions that we have in the state of Connecticut. While the adults have lifted everything from their own lives, children are really impacted. And so our caucus believes that should have been addressed. We've still gotten no data out of DPH or out of SDE to look at not just the transmission in schools, but also the impact of these masks on children's learning. And so we want to have that conversation. I think it's time now, where we are on this virus, that we should be removing the masks.
If he lifts it, is that a political calculation on his part? I mean, if he does that before this February 15th power?
Well, absolutely. I mean, one of my frustrations is The governor is making decisions based on politics and not science. And frankly, I think we've seen this across the country. Unlike when you look at other countries like Israel, we are seeing empirical data and science coming out that are dictating these decisions. So to me, what I want to hear from the governor is not just you're going to lift the mask mandate, but why? And why was it put on for so long? Because our DPH commissioner has not gathered any data to figure out how to protect our children and what are the least restrictive ways to protect them. I feel as if they put masks on these kids' faces, subjected them to social distancing, and left it up for the teachers to figure it out for the last 2 years. Meanwhile, they have done nothing to look at how to make the classroom safe and help them learn. And what we're finding now is it's no coincidence we have behavioral health issues in school, we have mental health issues in school, and we're finding that the children have fallen far behind in their reading and their learning. And so those are all the crisis issues that we now need to deal with because this administration was not proactive for our children.
The governor is set to talk about tax cuts. He may even be talking about it right now. Has he talked with you about it or any other leadership, or do you even know what's coming?
No, he hasn't. And you know, I'm guessing that he's going to try to renew the broken promise of property tax credit relief. That may be part of the proposal. And I think that while there is a surplus out there, we have to look at the big picture in the state of Connecticut. House Republicans will have our own tax relief package that we're putting forth. We think we need to focus on broad-based policies that impact everybody because everyone, no matter where you live, is impacted by affordability in the state of Connecticut. So we're looking at broad-based tax relief as well, and I'm hopeful that the governor will focus on that type of broad relief as well. Thank you.